Chapter 350. Su Qin saw Wind King and the other two activating their supreme treasures to protect themselves and used the primordial spirit killer move, Abyss of Darkness, without hesitation. The supreme treasures were very powerful, especially this pagoda-shaped supreme treasure. It was a defensive supreme treasure. Under the full power of the Wind King and the other two true realm earth deities, it would be able to withstand the attack of a pinnacle divine ruins magnate for a while. Although Su Qin had many trump cards and methods, he did not think he could match a peak divine ruin realm land immortal. Thus, he did not think of facing this defensive supreme treasure head-on. Buzz! Wind King and the other two felt like they had fallen into endless darkness. To them, Su Qin's eyes seemed to have a fatal attraction. They could not help but sink into them. Evidently, Su Qin's primordial spirit killer move had already started to affect the three. This was not because Su Qin's strength had surpassed peak divine ruin realm, but because primordial spirit killer moves were formless and unpredictable. Unless it was a primordial spirit supreme treasure refined by an expert of the primordial spirit lineage, other supreme treasures could not completely block the penetration of primordial spirit killer moves. This is... Among the three, Purple Mansion Sacred Lands Daoist Wan Yuan was the first to break free from the influence of the primordial spirit killer move, Abyss of Darkness. After all, Daoist Wan Yuan was a origin-returning realm land immortal of the primordial spirit lineage. His resistance to primordial spirit killer moves was stronger than the other two. Adding on the protection of the supreme treasure, even if the primordial spirit killer move, Abyss of Darkness, penetrated, its power would be reduced to less than half. What happened? Immediately after, the other two also quickly reacted and looked around with a blank expression. Oh no! Daoist Wan Yuan's expression changed as he shouted, "Activate the supreme treasure again." Earlier, when the three were affected by the primordial spirit killer move, they lost control of their magic power and did not continue to inject it into the supreme treasure. Without the support of their magic power, the pagoda-shaped defensive supreme treasure above their heads started to weaken rapidly. Wind King and Nine Senses Saber Master's expressions changed as well. If they lost the protection of the supreme treasure, they had no confidence in returning to the sect alive from Su Qin's hands. However, just as the Wind King and the other two were about to continue pouring their magic power into the treasure, a deep and powerful voice suddenly rang out in their ears. "It's too late." Under the shocked gazes of the Wind King and the other two, Su Qin's figure had already appeared before them. To be more precise, he had appeared before the pagoda-shaped defensive treasure. Before the three of them could react, Su Qin stretched out his right hand and clenched it into a fist. Then he slammed it into the pagoda-shaped true treasure. This pagoda-shaped true treasure was a defensive true treasure. Compared to the Thunder God Clock, which was a sound wave true treasure, it was much stronger in terms of defense. However, Su Qin's strength was far from when he had destroyed Raytheon. After entering the origin realm, Su Qin had used the power of the primordial Qi Si to light up 2,000 light spots in the Great Sun diagram. His Golden Crow divine body had also reached a new level. Every move he made felt like the world was collapsing. If this pagoda-shaped defensive supreme treasure was still activated by the three origin realm land immortals, Su Qin would not be able to do anything to them. However, at this moment, under the influence of the primordial spirit killer move, Abyss of Darkness, the Wind King and the other two had already let go of their control over the pagoda-shaped true treasure. And without the owner's control, unless it was a life treasure that had already faintly gained sentience. Otherwise, ordinary supreme treasures were just a tortoise shell in Su Qin's eyes. Even if he could not break it, he could kick it far away. A dull sound could be heard. The pagoda-shaped true treasure floating above the Wind King and the other two was sent flying by Su Qin's punch even though it was not damaged at all. And under the control of Su Qin's War God domain, this pagoda-shaped true treasure was directly stored in the War God Temple. The Wind King and the other two were dumbfounded. In just a few moments, their most powerful trump card, that pagoda-shaped defensive supreme treasure, had disappeared. Especially the Wind King, that pagoda-shaped true treasure was given to him by the Grand Beginning Divine Lord to pass through the Void Tunnel. Hence, the Wind King had a certain sense of that supreme treasure. But at this moment, the Wind King felt that the pagoda-shaped true treasure was extremely far away from him, as if they were in another world. The War God Temple's expert, Ho Yuan, had specially refined a super-large spatial Dharma treasure to inherit the War God catalog. It was independent of the mortal world. The pagoda-shaped true treasure was stored in the War God Temple. To a certain extent, it was indeed a world away from the Wind King. Fellow Daoist, please spare my life. The Wind King begged without hesitation. Although the Immortal Gate was not far away, it was not even a few miles away. But under the cover of the War God domain, the Wind King knew that this distance was equivalent to a natural moat. Su Qin shook his head slightly and said, "You're trying to stall for time, right? You left an essence soul avatar in the Immortal Gate. You're probably trying to stall for time and report to your Divine Lord so that he can come out and save you." Su Qin opened his eye of truth, and all kinds of auras appeared in his vision. Naturally, the Wind King's aura was among them, and Su Qin noticed that the Wind King had a total of 2 auras. One of them was right in front of him, and the other was hidden deep inside the Immortal Gate. The Immortal Gate did not belong to the mortal world. Even the Eye of Truth could not see through the void tunnel and observe the Immortal Gate. But with the Wind King's aura in front of him as a coordinate, Su Qin could naturally discover the other aura belonging to the Wind King in the direction of the Immortal Gate. "How did you know?" The Wind King was shocked. Fellow Daoist. Before the Wind King could continue speaking, he saw a pair of deep eyes that seemed to contain a vast world. At this moment, without the protection of the pagoda-shaped treasure, the essence soul killer move, Abyss of Darkness, completely landed on the Wind King's body. In an instant, the Wind King's mind fell into darkness again, and his body floated there motionlessly. Swoosh! Su Qin directly slammed his palm and smashed the Wind King's body into meat paste. Next, the pine tree crushed his essence soul. This essence soul killer move is really useful. Su Qin was quite satisfied. In fact, although the essence soul killer move, Abyss of Darkness, was terrifying, it could only be used against martial artists whose cultivation level was far lower than Su Qin's. For example, when Su Qin faced a group of Earth immortals who had just entered the spirit-severing stage, the essence soul killer move, Abyss of Darkness, directly collapsed the essence soul of this group of spirit-severing stage Earth immortals. But against experts of the same cultivation level, such as the Wind King, who was a origin-returning stage Earth immortal, the essence soul killer move, Abyss of Darkness, could only affect the other party and cause their mind to fall into darkness for a moment. And after a moment, the other party would be able to break free from the influence of the essence soul killer move, Abyss of Darkness. But unfortunately, for Su Qin, not to mention a moment, even an instant was enough for him to attack hundreds of times. The essence soul clone is entrusted to the main body. If the main body dies, the essence soul clone will naturally dissipate. Su Qin retracted his right hand and glanced at the Immortal Gate. Indeed, the 2 auras belonging to the Wind King, whether it was the one in front of him or the one inside the Immortal Gate, had both disappeared. The essence soul clone was different from the divine sense that Su Qin had created through the great demonic will separation parasitism. The essence soul clone was a method that spirit-severing stage Earth immortals naturally grasped. The essence soul clone was completely entrusted to the main body, and if the main body died, the essence soul clone would rapidly dissipate. But the great demonic will separation parasitism could create a shared but independent divine sense. Although the 2 were the same life form, their life and death were not affected by each other. This was also the reason why Su Qin had always let the clone that he had created through the great demonic will separation parasitism stay in the cave world. Whether it was the main body or the demonic will separation parasitism, as long as one of them didn't die, Su Qin would have 2 lives. This was the most terrifying part of the great demonic will separation parasitism. The Wind King has fallen. Not far away, when the 9 Senses Saber Master saw this scene, his scalp went numb, and he immediately began to burn his blood essence Shui. Even his primordial spirit began to burn. But the next moment, The Nine Senses Saber Master once again looked at a pair of eyes that were as deep as the vast world. No! The Nine Senses Saber Master clearly knew that all of this was Su Qin's killing move, but he couldn't break free no matter what. He could only watch as his mind sank into darkness, and then, his physical body and primordial spirit were crushed by Su Qin's palm. It's really easy. After Su Qin destroyed the Nine Senses Saber Master's physical body and primordial spirit, he sighed again. If he didn't have the primordial spirit killer move, Abyss of Darkness, with his various trump cards, he could still kill the other party, but it would also be troublesome, and a trace of the other party's primordial spirit might have escaped. Whether it was the Wind King or the Nine Senses Saber Master, they were both true realm land immortals with peerless talent, and who knew how many fortuitous encounters they had encountered. Even when facing the suppression of a divine ruin realm overlord, they could still escape, let alone Su Qin. But the primordial spirit killer move, Abyss of Darkness, completely cut off this possibility. Under the influence of Abyss of Darkness, the other party's mind would fall into darkness, and they wouldn't even be able to move, let alone escape. Looks like I have to be careful of primordial spirit experts next time, Su Qin thought to himself. Although his primordial aperture had the Buddha golden body suppressing it and ignoring all primordial spirit killer moves, there were some strange primordial spirit killer moves that didn't kill your primordial spirit. This was Su Qin's wishful thinking. Ordinary primordial spirit experts were proficient in primordial spirit killer moves, and their methods were strange and unpredictable, but their physical bodies were abnormally weak. Even if they used primordial spirit killer moves to restrain the enemy for a moment, they would not be able to destroy the other party's physical body. Unlike Su Qin, who had terrifying primordial spirit killer moves and an unparalleled physical body. With the combination of the two, the primordial spirit killer moves would restrain the other party and then directly destroy the other party's physical body. With the combination of the two, it was enough for Su Qin to sweep through most of his peers. Just as Su Qin was killing the Wind King and the Nine Senses Saber Master. Inside the Immortal Sect. Inside the Wind God Valley. The primordial spirit clone that the Wind King had left behind in the valley flew into the sky, ignoring the obstruction of countless formations as it headed towards a certain direction. What happened? The Wind God Valley Lord immediately noticed the Wind King's actions and quickly appeared before him, asking with a frown. Valley Lord, save. A trace of fear appeared on the Wind King's face. He opened his mouth, but before he could finish his words, his body rapidly dissipated. When the Wind God Valley Lord saw this, his expression turned extremely ugly. There was only one possibility for the Wind King's primordial spirit clone to suddenly dissipate. The Wind King had died. Who is it? The Wind God Valley Lord's aura suddenly burst out, and the terrifying peak of the divine ruin realm's aura shrouded the heavens and earth, almost beginning to pry open space and affect the world. Even though the Wind God Valley was a sacred ground left behind by an expert and had countless foundations and was one of the 6 sacred grounds of the immortal sects, a true realm land immortal was definitely a pillar of support for the Wind God Valley. There were only slightly more than 10 true realm land immortals in the entire Wind God Valley. Now that one of them had suddenly died, even the peak of the divine ruin realm's Valley Lord felt extremely pained. Heavenly Saber Mountain. The Nine Senses Saber Master's primordial spirit clone also forcibly dissipated before the Mountain Lord. What happened in the human realm? The Heavenly Saber Mountain Lord's expression was solemn as he muttered to himself. Whether it was the Wind King or the Nine Senses Saber Master, they had all died too quickly. It had only been a few moments, and their primordial spirit clones had quickly dissipated before they could say anything useful. When the Divine Lords and the other Divine Lords joined forces and activated the Demon God's Eye to spy on the human realm, we didn't find any land immortals. The Heavenly Saber Mountain Lord's brows were tightly knitted. The supreme treasure bestowed by the primordial Divine Lord and its power passed through the void tunnel without any danger. The Heavenly Saber Mountain Lord was perplexed. In his opinion, the Wind King and the other 2 should have been safe in the human realm. How could they have died? This is troublesome, the Heavenly Saber Mountain Lord thought to himself. Primordial Divine Grounds. The primordial divine lord did not know that the Wind King and the Nine Senses Saber Master had already died. The Supreme Treasure's aura has weakened by a lot? The primordial divine lord rubbed his brows, his heart filled with shock and doubt. He was still the true owner of the pagoda-shaped supreme treasure that he had bestowed upon the Wind King and the others, so he could roughly sense the location of the pagoda-shaped supreme treasure. But just now, the primordial divine lord suddenly sensed that the pagoda-shaped supreme treasure was almost beyond his senses. Even though the primordial divine lord could vaguely sense that the pagoda-shaped supreme treasure was still there, he could not pinpoint its exact location. What happened? The primordial divine lord vaguely felt that something was wrong, so he immediately contacted the heavenly Saber Mountain Lord. As the 6 sacred grounds of the immortal sect, they naturally had a way to quickly contact each other. In front of the immortal sect, after Su Qin killed the Wind King and the Nine Senses Saber Master, he looked at Daoist Wan Yuan. Daoist Wan Yuan was a land immortal from the Purple Mansion Sacred Ground, and the Purple Mansion Sacred Ground's path was the primordial spirit. That's right. You're the only one who didn't leave behind your primordial spirit clone. Su Qin looked at Daoist Wan Yuan and said casually. Through the eye of truth, Su Qin naturally discovered that Daoist Wan Yuan's aura was only in front of him, and there was no other aura in the immortal sect. This meant that Daoist Wan Yuan did not leave behind his primordial spirit clone. Otherwise, the primordial spirit clone was equivalent to Daoist Wan Yuan, and their auras were completely identical. Under the eye of truth, it would not be able to hide from Su Qin. It was precisely because of this that Su Qin deliberately spared Daoist Wan Yuan's life. After all, Su Qin still wanted to obtain more detailed information about the immortal sect from him. I didn't leave behind my primordial spirit clone. Daoist Wan Yuan smiled bitterly. He vaguely realized that this was probably the reason why he was still alive. Indeed, Daoist Wan Yuan did not leave behind his primordial spirit clone. Splitting the primordial spirit and leaving behind a clone would weaken the primordial spirit power, and this would greatly affect a land immortal of the primordial spirit lineage. Moreover, if the main body died, the primordial spirit clone would also dissipate, so leaving behind a primordial spirit clone was the same result. Fellow Daoist, if you have any questions, please ask. I'll definitely tell you everything I know. Daoist Wan Yuan sighed softly and bowed to Su Qin. P.S. I'm ashamed. That's all. Chapter 351. You're pretty smart. Su Qin glanced at Daoist Wan Yuan with a smile on his face. He originally thought that Daoist Wan Yuan would struggle a few more times. As a land immortal of the essence soul lineage, if Daoist Wan Yuan was willing to give up his body and escape with his essence soul, there was a glimmer of hope for him to escape the suppression of the War God domain. But it was only a glimmer of hope. With the War God domain's control and suppression of heaven and earth, Daoist Wan Yuan's chances of escaping were less than 1 in 10,000. Besides, even if Daoist Wan Yuan was lucky enough to escape, what could he do? Without the protection of the pagoda-shaped treasure, Daoist Wan Yuan couldn't pass through the void passage in the immortal sect with his essence soul body. He could only hide in a corner of the human world. With the observation of the aura of the world with the eye of truth, Daoist Wan Yuan couldn't escape from Su Qin's Five-Finger Mountain. Daoist Wan Yuan shook his head and said, Fellow Daoist, your strength is unfathomable. How would I dare to fight against you? Daoist Wan Yuan didn't know that Su Qin had a divine ability like the Eye of Truth that could lock onto one's aura. However, Su Qin had defeated 3 true realm land immortals with just a wave of his hand. Especially his last punch, which directly sent the pagoda-shaped treasure flying. How unbelievable was that? One had to know that this was a treasure, and it was a defensive treasure. Even the spatial fragments that could shatter everything couldn't do anything to it. Although Su Qin had used his essence soul killer move, Abyss of Darkness, to temporarily restrain their minds before he sent the pagoda-shaped treasure flying with a punch, they didn't have the energy to continue controlling the pagoda-shaped treasure. Even so, the pagoda-shaped treasure wasn't something that a true realm land immortal could shake. Don't resist. With a thought, Su Qin turned a wisp of essence soul power into a seed and gently planted it into Daoist Wan Yuan's forehead. It was the great Dao Heart Demon Seed art that Su Qin had obtained from signing in. This was an essence soul secret technique that was specially used to enslave others. Apart from enslavement, Su Qin could also clearly sense the other party's emotional fluctuations through this essence soul secret technique and determine if they were lying. This, Daoist Wan Yuan sensed that his ancestral aperture was being invaded. He hesitated for a moment but did not stop it. Instead, he opened his ancestral aperture and allowed the other party to invade. With Daoist Wan Yuan's attainments in his essence soul, there was naturally no problem Daoist Wan Yuan's will. However, Daoist Wan Yuan didn't dare. Su Qin was right in front of him. If he dared to make any move, he would be crushed by Su Qin just like Wind King and Nine Senses' Saber Master. Daoist, 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 Daoist Wan, Daoist, 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 Daoist. Wan Yuan's, Daoist, S back to Daoist, Daoist, Daoist's Purple Mansion's sacred grounds? Su Qin touched his chin, as if he had expected this. Taiyin Fairy had long told him about the 6 sacred lands in the Immortal sect. Among them, the Purple Mansion was the only sacred land with the essence soul lineage. Su Qin naturally guessed Daoist Wan Yuan's origin from the essence soul technique he displayed in the battle just now. How many peak divine ruins experts are there in your Purple Mansion sacred land? Su Qin asked bluntly. With Su Qin's current strength, even if he encountered an earth immortal of the divine ruins realm, he could still escape unscathed. Only those peak experts of the divine ruins realm who had already begun to come into contact with the power of space could pose some danger to Su Qin. One had to know that the power grasped by the peak of the divine ruins realm was known as the limit of the world. The next step was to break through the void and become a supreme expert. Especially when a peak divine ruins expert held the supreme expert's life treasure, he could probably exert 1% of the supreme expert's power with just a raise of his hand. The Purple Mansion's sacred land now has 3 peak divine ruins experts. Daoist Wan Yuan hesitated for a moment, then gritted his teeth and said, 2 of them are the Grand Elders who live in seclusion in the depths of the sacred land, and the Sacred Lord. Other than that, the Purple Mansion sacred land also has a direct bloodline descendant of the supreme expert, but I'm not sure who it is exactly. Daoist Wan Yuan did not hesitate to reveal the biggest secret of the Purple Mansion's sacred land. The direct bloodline descendant of the supreme expert. It must be known that although there were many descendants who possessed the bloodline of supreme experts in the various holy lands of the immortal sects, the number of disciples who could truly awaken their bloodline and inherit a certain ability of the supreme expert and become a direct descendant was 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, and 1 in 1,000,000. Any direct bloodline descendant of the supreme expert who had awakened their bloodline had unlimited potential. As long as they continued to grow smoothly, they would be able to surpass the peak of the divine ruins realm sooner or later and dominate the immortal sect world. However, the 6 sacred lands of the immortal sect were not monolithic. Ordinary genius disciples could not enter the eyes of the sacred lands, but the direct bloodline descendant of the supreme expert. This was a power that could control the entire immortal sect world. If a bloodline descendant of the supreme expert had completely matured, naturally, no sacred lands would dare to provoke them. However, if a bloodline descendant of the supreme expert who had not yet matured was exposed to the various sacred lands in advance and could not be taken in for their own use, they would probably attract all kinds of assassination attempts. After all, no matter how strong the potential of a bloodline descendant of the supreme expert was, it was only potential. Once they died prematurely, they would be nothing. Hence, the 6 sacred lands of the immortal sect naturally protected the direct bloodline descendant of the supreme expert extremely tightly. Before their strength had completely matured, they would definitely not let others know about it. Daoist Wan Yuan only knew that the current generation of the Purple Mansion sacred land had awakened a direct bloodline descendant of the supreme expert because he was a disciple of one of the Grand Elders in the Purple Mansion sacred land. However, that was all. As for who exactly it was not something that Daoist Wan Yuan could know. In the entire Purple Mansion's sacred land, only the Sacred Lord and the two Grand Elders knew about the direct bloodline descendant of the Supreme Expert. A direct bloodline descendant of the Supreme Expert. Su Qin had a thoughtful look on his face. According to Taiyin Fairy, before the Supreme Experts of the 6 sacred lands of the Immortal Sect died of old age, they would spread part of their bloodline to all the disciples in their respective sacred lands. Most of these bloodlines would completely die out, but there was a slight possibility that after dozens of generations of inheritance, the bloodline would suddenly awaken. This was the direct bloodline descendant of the Supreme Expert. The so-called direct bloodline descendant was not the descendant of the Supreme Expert. In fact, the higher the realm, the lower the possibility of having a descendant. This was especially true for the Supreme Experts of the Void-shattering realm, who had almost cut off the possibility of having a descendant. However, even if they could not have a descendant, it did not mean that they could not continue the bloodline. Daoist Wan Yuan saw that Su Qin did not speak and immediately said in fear, "Sir, I am not sure who the direct bloodline descendant is." "I know," Su Qin said lightly. Through the great Dao Heart demonic seed art, Su Qin could sense Daoist Wan Yuan's true emotions. Naturally, he was sure that Daoist Wan Yuan was not deliberately hiding anything. "This is the Supreme Expert of the Void-shattering realm." Su Qin's expression was calm, but his heart was filled with emotions. In martial arts cultivation, even the powerful Earth Immortals could only show off their power for a lifetime. When the 1,000-year limit came, everything would turn to ashes. Nothing would remain. However, the Supreme Experts of the Void-shattering realm, even if they died of old age, could still use the power of their bloodline to bless their descendants. Their methods were simply incredible. In a way, a sacred ground that had given birth to a Supreme Expert could easily be passed down for generations as long as they did not seek death. After all, with the bloodline descendants of the Supreme Experts, a direct bloodline descendant would awaken every few hundred or 1,000 years. The sacred ground would only become stronger and stronger. Not long ago, how did your sect spy on the mortal world? Su Qin pondered for a while and continued to ask. "Sir." Daoist Wan Yuan smiled bitterly. "A few divine lords used the eye of the demon god to spy on the mortal world. It was precisely because the eye of the demon god found no threat in the mortal world that Daoist Wan Yuan volunteered to go to the mortal world. After all, Daoist Wan Yuan was a disciple of one of the Purple Mansion's sacred grounds. If Daoist Wan Yuan did not want to, even the Purple Mansion's sacred lord would not force him." Thinking of this, Daoist Wan Yuan's expression became even more bitter. If he had known that there was a freak like Su Qin in the mortal world, he would not have come to the mortal world even if he was beaten to death. Eye of the demon god? Su Qin narrowed his eyes. He observed the gate of immortality with the eye of truth and indeed found a huge eye with a pitch-black pupil. The eye of the demon god is a treasure jointly refined by the Supreme Experts 10,000 years ago, imitating the demon god of the cave world. It can easily spy on the entire mortal world. Daoist Wan Yuan hurriedly told him everything he knew. "I see." Su Qin's thoughts were in turmoil. "I still don't know how far away it is from the real demon god opening its eyes." Su Qin shook his head slightly and commented. Su Qin was probably the human who understood the demon god of the cave world the best apart from the Supreme Experts. There were even dozens of drops of demon god blood in Su Qin's system space. Even if Su Qin could not touch or sense these dozens of drops of demon god blood, just by observing with his eyes, he realized how terrifying the demon god of the cave world was. The Supreme Experts were said to have a lifespan of more than 5,000 years. But the demon gods in the depths of the cave world had set off several wars that invaded the mortal world. They had existed for more than tens of thousands of years. Su Qin even suspected that these demon gods had existed since the birth of the cave world, like eternal and indestructible gods. But now it seems that the reason why I can't touch the demon god blood and can only see it with my eyes is probably because the demon god blood did not come from this layer of space at all? Su Qin thought silently. Or, if it weren't for the system sign-in, I wouldn't even be able to see the demon god blood? Su Qin guessed. Forget it. There's no need to think about the demon god now. No matter how powerful the demon god is, there should be great restrictions and they can't intervene in the mortal world. Otherwise, if the demon god chose to descend in person 10,000 years ago, even if there were 10 times more supreme experts, they wouldn't be able to win. Su Qin shook his head and thought. When will the 6 great holy lands of the immortal sect enter the mortal world? Su Qin calmed down, looked at Daoist Wan Yuan, and asked. Before Daoist Wan Yuan and the other 2 entered the mortal world, Su Qin had been here for a long time and had been observing the huge ancient stone gate not far away. According to Su Qin's observation, this huge ancient stone gate should be in the sealing stage. The reason why Daoist Wan Yuan and the other 2 could enter the mortal world was entirely because of the gap in the seal. And this gap in the seal could only accommodate a few people at a time, and it was extremely difficult. Therefore, if the 6 great holy lands of the immortal sect wanted to enter the mortal world en masse, the first thing they had to do was to open the immortal gate. The seal left by the supreme experts cut off the connection between the mortal world and the immortal gate. But as long as the mortal world's vitality tide passes the 6th critical point, the vitality spiritual vigor on both sides will form a balance. At that time, the immortal gate will naturally be completely opened. Daoist Wan Yuan said immediately. This was what the Divine Lord told him before he left. The 6th critical point of the recovery of the vitality tide? Su Qin's thoughts turned quickly, and he relaxed slightly. The recovery of the vitality tide was only approaching the 2nd critical point, and there were still decades or centuries to go before the 6th critical point. Su Qin had enough time to cultivate. Sir? Just as Daoist Wan Yuan was about to speak carefully, Su Qin's expression changed slightly, and he looked at the huge ancient stone gate not far away with a serious expression. Buzz! A huge eye with an unfathomable pitch-black pupil slowly opened. Its terrifying gaze pierced through layers of the void, and it seemed that even the immortal gate could not block it as it slowly looked toward the mortal world. The eye of the demon god? Su Qin muttered to himself. At this moment, Su Qin felt like he was being watched again. It was exactly the same feeling he felt when he was in seclusion in the Black Palace under Chang, in city not long ago. Because Su Qin was now close to the stone gate, Su Qin felt even more intense. The eye of the demon god? Daoist Wan Yuan's expression changed slightly. Although he did not feel the eye of the demon god spying on him, he could roughly guess from Su Qin's expression. Did the Divine Lords activate the eye of the demon god again? Daoist Wan Yuan was both happy and worried. It was obvious that the death of the Wind King and the 9 Senses Saber Master, 2 true realm Earth Immortals, had infuriated the Wind God Valley and the Heavenly Sword Mountain. They immediately joined forces with the other Divine Lords to activate the eye of the demon god again, trying to figure out what had happened in the mortal world. Hee, Su Qin chuckled. With a thought, the god of war domain covered a 10-meter radius around him. The void within the 10-meter radius was slightly distorted. Su Qin's figure suddenly became illusory, as if he did not exist in the mortal world. Even Daoist Wan Yuan's figure was faintly discernible. Buzz! A majestic wave spread out from the immortal gate. It instantly passed through Su Qin and Daoist Wan Yuan and swept toward the distance. What? Daoist Wan Yuan was shocked. He did not feel the wave of the eye of the demon gods spying on the mortal world. However, when Su Qin used the god of war domain to cover him, Daoist Wan Yuan immediately felt as if he had left the mortal world, or rather, he was independent of the mortal world. Sir, did you use this method to avoid the eye of the demon god? Daoist Wan Yuan's mind raced. His heart was suddenly in turmoil. He had originally guessed that Su Qin had used some kind of treasure to avoid the eye of the demon god. However, Su Qin had used his own strength to deceive the eye of the demon god. Chapter 352. Using external forces to avoid the prying eyes of the demon god and relying on one's own strength to prevent the demon god's eye from detecting were 2 completely different concepts. For example, a land immortal of the divine ruin realm with a life treasure of the strongest was enough to sweep through a group of divine ruin realm experts, But could this land immortal of the divine ruin realm be said to be strong? It could only be said that the life treasure of the strongest was strong. Even if it was another land immortal holding this life treasure, the result would still be the same. At this moment, Daoist Wan Yuan was shrouded in the war god domain. He didn't feel the aura of any life treasure, but he could easily deceive the demon god's eye. It was simply incredible. The eye of the demon god was a precious treasure created by the combined efforts of many supreme powerhouses. It had the function of monitoring the mortal world. Although the one using the eye of the demon god was not a supreme powerhouse, the power of the treasure itself was enough to see through everything. Buzz! The gaze of the demon god's eye kept sweeping out of the immortal gate. Compared to the previous time when several holy lords jointly activated the demon god's eye to spy on the world, this time it was obviously more serious. The terrifying gaze lingered in the world for more than half an hour before it finally slowly returned to the immortal gate. Too rigid. Su Qin's figure was illusory, shrouded in the war god domain. He quietly watched the demon god's eyes' aura gradually disappear and shook his head slightly. If it was the gaze of a demon god from the cave world, not to mention Su Qin hiding in the war god domain, even if he used the war god temple to go deep into the void, he would be discovered. After all, Su Qin's current war god domain couldn't even be considered a prototype. At most, it could only be a world shadow. How could it escape the gaze of a demon god? Although the demon god's eye was far inferior to the gaze of a real demon god, it was still refined by several strongest experts. Logically speaking, even if it couldn't find Su Qin, it could still capture some clues. However, the holy lords who activated the demon god's eye in the immortal gate couldn't exert the true power of the demon god's eye at all. Daoist Wan Yuan stared at the huge ancient stone gate not far away, and his expression changed slightly. He seemed to have thought of something and quickly said, "Lord, let's leave quickly. Otherwise, once the holy lords arrive." Although Daoist Wan Yuan was unwilling, he knew that his life was now in Su Qin's hands. With just a thought, Su Qin could make his ancestral aperture collapse and his primordial spirit extinguish. He couldn't even possess his body. Therefore, Daoist Wan Yuan was sincerely thinking for Su Qin's sake. He wanted to prevent Su Qin from clashing head-on with the sacred masters. In Daoist Wan Yuan's opinion, although Su Qin was powerful and could even escape the detection of the eye of the demon god, there was still a gap between him and the sacred lords who stood at the peak of the small world of immortals. The various divine lords were in charge of the Holy Land and had their own natal cardinal treasures. Unless they encountered a direct descendant of a supreme expert who also had a natal cardinal treasure, they would be able to suppress them. As for the others, they were no match for them at all. The arrival of the Holy Lord? Su Qin smiled and shook his head. They won't come. Won't descend? Daoist Wan Yuan was slightly taken aback. If the Holy Lords were willing to descend, it wouldn't be you true realm cultivators who came to the mortal world this time, Su Qin said lightly. For example, Su Qin wouldn't easily enter the immortal gate at this moment. Before figuring out what was going on in the mortal world, the Holy Lords in the immortal gate wouldn't easily enter the mortal world either. To be able to become a Holy Lord, one had to be at least at the peak of the godly ruins. Such an expert had gone through countless trials and tribulations. Unless it was absolutely necessary, who would let him personally take the risk? If the Holy Lords in the Immortal Gate hadn't activated the eye of the demon god, Su Qin would have guessed that the Nine Senses Saber Master and the Wind King had sent information back to the Immortal Gate before they died. But in the end, the eye of the demon god peeped into the mortal world again. The only possibility for the Holy Lords to activate the eye of the demon god again was that they still didn't know what was going on in the mortal world and why the Wind King and the Nine Senses Saber Master had died. Inside the Immortal Gate, in the palace that floated under the sky, the Saint Sovereigns gathered together again, their expressions solemn. The Wind King and the Nine Senses Saber Master had died one after another, which raised the Holy Lord's alertness to the highest. They activated the eye of the demon god again without hesitation to spy on the mortal world. However, the result this time was no different from the previous time. Even though they had used up several times more energy than the previous time and used the eye of the demon god to spy on the mortal world for an hour, they still didn't find anything. Who did it? The primeval Holy Lord said in a low voice. Although the three people who had entered the mortal world this time weren't from the primeval holy ground, the primeval holy ground had given them a supreme treasure. The Wind King and the Nine Senses Saber Master had died, which meant that the supreme treasure had fallen into the hands of others. How could the primeval Holy Lord bear such a loss? For thousands of years, it had always been the primeval holy ground that took the treasures of others. When had the supreme treasure of the primeval holy ground been taken away by others? Don't panic. Although it's a little troublesome now, it's actually very easy to solve, the Daoism Holy Lord said slowly as he looked at the others. Very easy to solve? How do you think we should solve it? The eyes of the primeval Holy Lord, the Valley Master of the Wind God Valley, and the others lit up as they looked at the Daoism Holy Lord. It's very simple. The Daoism Holy Lord didn't keep them in suspense and said directly, any one of us just needs to go to the mortal world personally. The moment he said that, the expressions of the Sacred Lords changed. The Daoism Holy Lord was right. The Sacred Lords present were all at the peak of the godly ruins and had mastered countless inheritances left behind by supreme experts. How could they be compared to the Wind King and the Nine Senses Saber Master? Although they didn't know who had done it in the mortal world, being able to easily kill the Wind King and the Nine Senses Saber Master didn't mean that they could do anything to the Sacred Lords. However, although the Daoism Holy Lord's method was very effective, none of the Sacred Lords present were willing to try it. They were very confident in their own abilities. Unless a supreme expert was born in the mortal world, the Sacred Lords would be able to escape unscathed even if they couldn't defeat him. But what if they really died in the mortal world like the Wind King and the Nine Senses Saber Master? Although this possibility was very small, which Sacred Lord present wasn't a sly old fox. Naturally, they didn't want to take this risk. Although the death of a true realm Earth god would make the Sacred Lord's hearts ache, they could still accept it. However, if a Sacred Lord at the peak of the godly ruins died, it would be a great loss to the entire sacred ground. Since the Daoism Holy Lord has said so, why don't you come to the mortal world yourself? Don't worry. If anything happens in the mortal world, we'll work together to save you. The sect master of the Sky Blade Mountain immediately said. If that's the case, pretend that I didn't say anything, the Daoism Holy Lord said as he shook his head. Purple Mansion Sacred Lord, is Wan Yuan from your sacred ground still alive? At this moment, the Valley Master of the Wind God Valley turned to look at the Purple Mansion's Sacred Lord, who hadn't said a word. No. The Purple Mansion's Sacred Lord closed his eyes and sensed for a while before saying, Wan Yuan is the disciple of Fuyao Grand Supreme. He should have used a trump card to barely survive. That's true. The Valley Master of the Wind God Valley nodded slightly. The Purple Mansion's sacred ground was the sacred ground of the Primordial Soul sect. Their methods were strange and unpredictable. Wan Yuan Daoist was the disciple of the Purple Mansion's sacred ground's Grand Supreme. It was very likely that a trace of his primordial soul had escaped and was hiding somewhere. However, without the protection of the supreme treasure, even if Wan Yuan Daoist survived, he would be at death's door. He wouldn't be able to return to the gate of heaven and tell them what had happened in the mortal world. It's a pity that other than the legendary primordial soul supreme treasures, the other supreme treasures can only be activated with dermic powers. Otherwise, I would want to split a primordial soul avatar and go to the mortal world to take a look. The Valley Master of the Wind God Valley sighed softly. To enter the mortal world, one had to pass through the Void Tunnel. However, the Void Tunnel was filled with space fragments. Only supreme treasures and precious treasures that contained the power of space could pass through. Regardless of whether it was supreme treasures or precious treasures, they all required dermic powers to activate. As for the primordial soul avatar, it was completely formed from the primordial soul and naturally didn't have dermic powers. Therefore, it couldn't activate the supreme treasures and pass through the Void Tunnel. It was said that the Purple Mansion's sacred ground had the legendary primordial soul supreme treasures. However, primordial soul's supreme treasures were extremely rare. In terms of value, they were almost as valuable as Natal's supreme treasures. Of course, the Purple Mansion's sacred ground wouldn't be willing to hand them over. We sacred lords are the pillars of the sacred ground. We need to guard the gate of heaven and can't leave. However, other than us, you can send your disciples to the mortal world again. Before leaving, let them leave behind a primordial soul avatar. If anything happens, immediately inform us through the primordial soul avatar. The mountain master of the heavenly Blade Mountain's expression changed. Before the Wind King and the Nine Senses Saber Master died, they had rushed out with their primordial soul avatars. However, before they could say what had happened, their true bodies died and their primordial soul avatars dissipated. Therefore, the mountain master of the heavenly Blade Mountain suggested this method. If there were sacred lords guarding the Wind King and the Nine Senses Saber Master before their primordial soul avatars dissipated, even if they couldn't save them, they could at least find out what had happened to the Nine Senses Saber Master in the mortal world and who had killed them. However, this method also had a flaw. That was, the disciples who were sent out to the human world would have no chance of surviving. However, it was better to let the disciples die than to let the sacred lords personally take the risk. Actually, there's no need to exhaust the disciples of the sacred grounds. In the world of heaven, other than the 6 sacred grounds, there are also countless ordinary living beings. Over the past 10,000 years, many of these ordinary living beings have embarked on the path of martial arts. Now, there are quite a few sects that are quite powerful. The Grand Een Sacred Lord said slowly. Before the end of the previous vital chi tide, the various supreme experts had broken through the void and opened up the small world of heaven. Not only did they bring their own inheritances into the small world of heaven, but they also brought in countless living beings. After all, even the 6 sacred grounds needed new blood. After 10,000 years of reproduction, the living beings living in the small world of heaven numbered in the billions. Moreover, some of the living beings with good talent were unwilling to join the 6 sacred grounds and were restricted. Thus, they set up their own sects and lived freely. The 6 sacred grounds naturally turned a blind eye to this. A batch of these sects would disappear every few hundred years. Without the heritage of the sacred grounds, how could they survive for so long? That's right. I've heard that there's a sect called the Myriad Transformation Sect that was founded by the Myriad Transformation Spiritual Master. This Myriad Transformation Spiritual Master is already an Earth Immortal at the peak of the Origin Returning Realm. The Valley Master of the Wind God Valley said slowly. He had once cherished talent and wanted to accept this Myriad Transformation Spiritual Master as his disciple. After all, to be able to cultivate to the peak of the Origin Returning Realm without relying on any sacred grounds resources, one could imagine his talent. Unfortunately, the Myriad Transformation Spiritual Master was arrogant by nature and thought that he could enter the ruins of God by himself. Thus, he naturally ignored the Wind God Valley's recruitment. The Valley Master of the Wind God Valley was somewhat annoyed by this, so he chose to watch coldly from the sidelines. He wanted to see how the Myriad Transformation Spiritual Master would enter the ruins of God. One must know that to enter the ruins of God from the Origin Returning Realm, one must not only rely on oneself, but also have to come into contact with the power of space. In the entire small world of heaven, only the 6 sacred grounds had mastered the power of space. The Valley Master of the Wind God Valley thought that the Myriad Transformation Spiritual Master wanted to enter the ruins of God with his own strength. Then let this Myriad Transformation Spiritual Master take a trip to the human world on our behalf. The Great Beginning Sacred Lord nodded slightly and said softly, "But be careful not to force this Myriad Transformation Spiritual Master too much. We have to give him some benefits so that he is willing." The Great Beginning Sacred Lord said thoughtfully. With the power of their Sacred Lord, they could indeed force the Myriad Transformation Spiritual Master to take the initiative to go to the human world. But this way, the Myriad Transformation Spiritual Master's heart would be filled with resentment. If the other party betrayed them after entering the human world, wouldn't it be like drawing water with a bamboo basket? Therefore, they couldn't force him. They had to give him some benefits so that he would be willing. Outside the Immortal Gate, Su Qin waited for a while and realized that there was no movement from the huge ancient stone door. He realized that his guess was right. The sacred lords of the Immortal Gate really didn't dare to come out. In fact, this was human nature, who would easily put themselves in danger when they didn't know the depth of the situation. Of course, there were a small number of people who were straightforward and impulsive and didn't care about life and death. But to be able to cultivate to the peak of the ruins of God and become the sacred lord, they were obviously old foxes who weighed the pros and cons. This stone door. Su Qin slowly walked through the stone door and looked up. The stone door was dark yellow, but vaguely, it revealed a kind of aura that could tear the world apart. Obviously, there was a method left behind by a supreme expert on the stone door. What a pity! Su Qin shook his head slightly and gave up the idea of destroying the stone door. If he could destroy the stone door, it would be equivalent to completely severing the connection between the world of the Immortal Gate and the human world. In this way, the 6 sacred lands of the Immortal Gate would be completely trapped in the world of the Immortal Gate and would never be able to return to the human world. Then, when he was strong enough, he could recommunicate with the Immortal Gate and go in to sign in. But this huge ancient stone door was obviously not simple. Even if Su Qin hadn't made a move, he could see that the aura flowing above it was not something that an Earth Immortal level expert could shake. Therefore, he didn't even bother to make a move. But if I step into the peak of the ruins of God, I might be able to destroy the stone door with the first move of the Buddha's palm, the unique and righteous? Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. Even if I can't destroy it, I can use the second move, Pure Land in the Palm, to seal it forever. Chapter 353. The Buddha's palm had a total of 9 moves. There was no difference in quality between the 9 moves, but they focused on different aspects. For example, the first move, the unique and righteous, was a pure offensive divine palm. As for the second move, Pure Land in the Palm, it was a sealing divine palm. Unfortunately, the huge ancient stone door in front of Su Qin was too extraordinary. Although it was just standing there, it exuded an aura that could tear heaven and earth. If Su Qin attacked it, he would definitely suffer a backlash. My lord, are you okay? Daoist Wan Yuan saw Su Qin staring at the stone door and thought that Su Qin was worried about something. He couldn't help but comfort him. Your lord's strength is enough to dominate a region even in the Immortal Gate. Even if the sacred lords really come, they might not be able to do anything to you. Although the sacred lords were all at the peak of the divine ruins and had their own natal supreme treasures, if Su Qin wanted to hide, just this unknown domain that could hide from the eye of the demon god was enough to give the sacred lords a headache. Daoist Wan Yuan naturally didn't know that Su Qin's thoughts at this moment were to destroy or seal this stone door. If Daoist Wan Yuan knew Su Qin's thoughts, he would definitely be dumbfounded. This stone door was built by the supreme experts and was specially used to lock the coordinates between the mortal world and the Immortal Gate world. For thousands of years, countless spatial storms had crashed into this stone door, but it didn't shake at all. In terms of sturdiness, this stone door had probably surpassed the natal supreme treasures. Even if the supreme experts attacked, they might not be able to destroy this stone door. Su Qin ignored Daoist Wan Yuan's worries. At this moment, most of his attention was focused on this huge ancient stone door. This stone door. Su Qin looked at the huge ancient stone door not far away and suddenly thought of something. This stone door itself has experienced at least 10,000 years, and its material is rare. Maybe it contains a lot of Dao connotation ? Thinking of this, Su Qin circled around the huge ancient stone door. After confirming that he didn't miss anything, he said in his heart, "System, sign in for me." Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. You have received the World Tree Seed. A cold, mechanical voice suddenly sounded in Su Qin's ears. World Tree Seed? Su Qin's eyes widened in disbelief. Although he didn't know what the World Tree Seed was, just the word world was enough to tell him that the treasure he got this time was extraordinary. In the blink of an eye, Su Qin's mind quickly sank into the system space. Soon he found a fist-sized seed in the corner. This seed was chaotic and slowly rotated. It was as bright and deep as the void. Su Qin merely looked at it, and he felt as if he could see a world being nurtured within the seed. Once the seed of the world tree takes root and sprouts, it will grow into a world tree and open up a real big world, Su Xing thought to himself. Before seeing the world tree seed, the system had already transmitted everything about the seed to Su Qin's mind. It was precisely because of this that Su Qin realized just how terrifying this world tree seed was. It could open up a real big world. Even tens of thousands of years ago, when the various supreme powerhouses joined forces to break through the void, what they opened up was only an incomplete small world. They relied on plundering endless vitality, spiritual vigor, and nomological Tao fragments from the mortal world to survive until now. But this world tree seed was said to be able to truly open up a big world? How incredible was this? Although Su Qin cultivated the War God catalog and condensed the War God domain, he could also evolve a world when cultivated to the extreme. But even Su Qin himself didn't know if he could reach that step. The so-called evolving world was just the theoretical limit of the War God catalog. But even so, the Battle God catalog was something that even the supreme expert Ho Yuan could not obtain. And now, this world tree seed was said to be able to grow into a world tree sooner or later as long as there was enough time, creating a true great world. This was simply astonishing. If there were still supreme powerhouses in the current world who knew that Su Qin had such a world tree seed in his hands, they would probably risk their lives to snatch it. But why do I feel that this world tree seed is so familiar? Su Qin looked at the slowly rotating world tree seed in the system space and suddenly felt a little surprised. Su Qin was very sure that before today he had never seen any treasures related to the world tree seed, but now he felt that it was strangely familiar. Is this the cave world? Images flashed through Su Qin's mind one after another. As a true realm land immortal, how powerful was his memory? Almost in an instant, Su Qin had recalled everything that had happened since he stepped into the martial Dao and finally stopped at the cave world. To be precise, it was the branches of the ancient demon tree in the Demon Cloud City, Cathode City, and several other large cities in the cave world. The cave world was not like the mortal world, where there were many holy lands and great sections. The cave world was divided according to domains, and within each large domain, there were hundreds and thousands of large cities. And in each large city, there was a branch of the ancient demon tree. At this moment, the feeling that this world tree seed gave Su Qin was that it was very similar to a branch of the ancient demon tree. In fact, this similarity was not in terms of aura. A branch of the ancient demon tree could gather monstrous demonic energy, while this world tree seed was chaotic and pure. Not to mention the similarity, the two were completely different. But instinctively, Su Qin believed that the world tree seed and the ancient demon tree's branches were essentially similar. Could it be that the ancient demon tree in the depths of the cave world is a world tree? Su Qin narrowed his eyes slightly. One of Su Qin's incarnations stayed in the cave world all year round, so naturally, he had heard a lot of rumors about the ancient demon tree. It was said that this ancient demon tree was as tall as heaven and earth. There was a saying that the entire cave world was supported by the ancient demon tree. If it weren't for the ancient demon tree, the cave world would have collapsed long ago. Even the high and mighty demon gods, who were above everything, lived on a branch of the ancient demon tree all year round. From this, one could see how incredible the ancient demon tree was. Originally, Su Qin thought that the ancient demon tree should be a demonic treasure refined by the demon gods, but now it seems that if the ancient demon tree in the cave world was a world tree, then the relationship between the so-called demon gods and the ancient demon tree was probably not what Su Qin had imagined. Forget it. It's too early for me to think about this. Su Qin's thoughts turned quickly, and finally he slowly calmed down. Whether the ancient demon tree in the depths of the cave world was a world tree or not, it had nothing to do with Su Qin. Now, the most important thing for Su Qin to consider was how to make this world tree seed take root and grow as much as possible. Su Qin waited until the next day to confirm that this huge ancient stone gate could no longer sign in before preparing to return to Xianxia City. What a pity! Su Qin was slightly regretful. Originally, Su Qin was prepared to get some treasures from the stone gate. Even if they were not as good as the World Tree Seed, he could still get some supreme treasures. But it seemed that the sign-in for the World Tree Seed had exhausted all the Dao accumulation on the stone gate, causing Su Qin's idea of continuing to sign in to become empty talk. However, just this World Tree Seed alone is better than countless life treasures. Although Su Qin was regretful, he was already satisfied. One must know that the World Tree Seed was nurturing a complete world. How could a mere life treasure compare to it? Leave with me. Su Qin glanced at Daoist Wan Yuan and hesitated for a while, but in the end he didn't have the intention to kill him. This wasn't because Su Qin was a saint, but because Daoist Wan Yuan was in the true realm of the Essence Soul realm. The Essence Soul realm was rare to begin with, let alone the true realm. If he kept Daoist Wan Yuan, he might have a use for him in the future. In addition, Su Qin had already planted a wisp of Essence Soul power in the depths of Daoist Wan Yuan's ancestral aperture. Through the great Dao Heart demonic seed art, Su Qin could decide Daoist Wan Yuan's life and death with a thought. Daoist Wan Yuan didn't know that he had just walked through the gates of hell. He followed Su Qin cautiously and headed towards Xianxia City. Several hours later, Su Qin and Daoist Wan Yuan arrived at the palace. Senior Wan Yuan. Taiyin Fairy was stunned when she saw Daoist Wan Yuan. She couldn't believe it. Although Taiyin Fairy was the saintest-to-be of the Taiyin Holy Land, Daoist Wan Yuan's status wasn't low either. He was the disciple of the Purple Mansion Holy Land's Supreme Fuyao and was in the true realm of the Essence Soul realm. In terms of status, he wasn't inferior to Taiyin Fairy at all. It's me. Daoist Wan Yuan's expression was slightly complicated. It's good that you know each other. Now let's catch up. Su Qin glanced at Daoist Wan Yuan and Taiyin Fairy. He didn't stop them from talking. Instead, he took a step forward and disappeared on the spot. Whether it was Daoist Wan Yuan or Taiyin Fairy, their lives were in Su Qin's hands. Even their thoughts could be vaguely sensed by the great Dao Heart demonic seed art. Su Qin was naturally relieved. In the majestic underground palace of Xianxia City. Now that I've just stepped into the true realm, it'll be difficult for me to take another step forward in a short period of time, Su Qin thought to himself as he sat cross-legged. As for the Buddha's palm, I can continue to study it. But unless I become an ultimate expert and master the third move, it'll be difficult for me to make a qualitative change. As for the War God catalog and the Great Sun portrait, if I continue to cultivate, I'll need a lot of resources. I don't have any space crystals, fire element divine pills, and so on. Su Qin suddenly realized that he had fallen into a bottleneck and couldn't make any progress. In the end, every step of the martial path is difficult. I don't know how those supreme experts cultivate. Su Qin sighed. He had long expected the difficulty of the Earth God Immortal Realm. Although there were only 3 levels in the Earth God Immortal Realm, the Spirit Severing Stage, the True Realm, and the final Divine Ruins, compared to the 9 levels of the Myth Realm, it seemed much simpler. But in terms of difficulty, the former was much more difficult than the latter. The cultivation of the Myth Realm was gradual. As long as one took it slowly with enough talent and opportunities, one would sooner or later enter the peak of the Myth Realm. But the Earth God Immortal Realm, not to mention the Spirit Severing Stage and the True Realm, just the spatial power that one needed to comprehend in the Divine Ruins realm was illusory. Although the spatial power was everywhere, and even mortal ants could come into contact with it, who knew how to comprehend it and how to break it? Let's look at the World Tree Seed. Su Qin calmed himself down. With a thought, a chaotic seed appeared in front of him. In addition to this World Tree Seed, Su Qin also obtained a pagoda-shaped supreme treasure from signing in at the Immortal Sect. However, that pagoda-shaped supreme treasure was the supreme treasure of the Great Beginning Holy Land. There was a mark left behind by the Great Beginning's Sacred Lord in it. If Su Qin wanted to use it, he would have to consume a lot of worlds to erase the mark inside. How should this seed germinate? Su Qin looked at the slowly spinning world tree seed in front of him and suddenly felt a headache. If an ordinary seed wanted to germinate, it would naturally be planted in the ground and absorb the nutrients of the earth. However, the world tree seed was a seed that could open up a great world. How could it need to absorb the nutrients of the earth like an ordinary seed? Let's try the vitality spiritual vigor? With a thought, Su Qin instantly gathered the vitality spiritual vigor within 100 miles and floated in Su Qin's palm. Then, under Su Qin's control, it all surged into the world tree seed. Unfortunately, no matter how rich the vitality spiritual vigor was, it would automatically evaporate when it was 3 feet away from the world tree seed. The vitality spiritual vigor is useless. Su Qin had already expected this. Next, Su Qin tried various methods, but they were all useless. In the end, Su Qin directly forced out a drop of blood essence from his arm and landed on the world tree seed. This time, the world tree seed clearly reacted. This chaotic seed spun and devoured Su Qin's drop of blood essence. However, there was nothing. Even if Su Qin released some more blood essence, it was useless. However, Su Qin's only gain was that he seemed to vaguely sense the world tree seed. He could feel the surging vitality in the seed. If I had this vitality, I would probably be able to live for 100,000 years. Su Qin exclaimed in his heart. Just as Su Qin was cultivating and thinking about how to make the world tree seed take root and germinate, in the blink of an eye, a year had passed. In this year, the recovery of the vitality tide of heaven and earth became more and more turbulent. In a trance, the vast and endless vitality sea was rolling, leading the vitality tide of heaven and earth to rise continuously. Finally, it suddenly reached a critical point. Buzz! The entire world was shaking. If someone stood above the 9 heavens, they would find that the entire battlefield was like a prehistoric beast, swallowing and spitting out endless vitality chi and spiritual vigor. This is? In the palace, in front of the East Palace's right spring square, Tyene Fairy looked at the sky and whispered to herself, is the second critical point of the recovery of the vitality tide coming. At the same time, in the black majestic palace under Chang and City, Su Qin, who was sitting cross-legged, suddenly opened his eyes and looked up. It's finally here. Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, martial world, and tales of demons and gods.